So you've decided to use sub-assemblies. You may have, like I have, already started to prime and paint your models, and you realise this blue tack that I've got stuff stuck to at the moment is a bit tacky and stuff keeps falling off. So how can I mount stuff better in order to be able to paint it? So a couple of things to show you today. First thing, one of the oldest tips that I picked up in the hobby probably 35-40 years ago: paper clips. Doesn't matter if they're plastic coated or not, but unbend one, straighten it out, and depending on what you're doing, you can get at least 3 or 4 sufficient lengths out of this. Now, to start with, what you're going to want is some kind of hobby drill. I would suggest a hand drill rather than a Dremel. The Dremel goes a little bit too fast and ends up melting the plastic even on low rotations. So for this, what you're going to do is, for instance, with one of your models, before you mount it on the base, you want to paint around it and sort the base separately. You slowly rotate your pin vise with its tiny drill, and I think this one is a 1 mil diameter drill bit, and just drill out the hole. I've already partially drilled them out already. And what you can do is shove paper clip in the end there, cut a bit off. Now the problem we've got at the moment is this is just going to spin. So what a lot of people do is they'll put a dob of super glue in the end there, put the pin in, let it set. Once they've finished painting, you can put the super glue and the model in the freezer, and it will degrade the super glue and make it easier to break this out. I wouldn't tend to do this with the resin models, because any movement on a resin model, you risk snapping it, because the internal strength isn't as strong. Alternatively, with these coated ones, if your hole is slightly bigger, you can jam the tip of the plastic coated paper clip in and cut a length off. And at that point, I tend to use normal shears rather than my hobby shears for this, just because I don't really want to damage my hobby shears with steel or the metal that the paper clip's made of. And at that point, I can jam it into either a piece of foam if I've already primed them, or if I need to prime them again, I tend to use pieces of old wine bottle cork, and again I've pre-drilled some holes. I can fix it in there to hold it. Now, I can understand some people don't like the idea of drilling holes, and the drilling hole method takes a long time and there are some issues. For example, with some of these thinner parts on, say, the bloke drone kit, if you were trying to drill down into one of these pipe sections, if for whatever reason you decided you absolutely had to, you get to the point where, with some of the finer details, the diameter of your drill is getting or approaching the diameter of the piece. Especially a problem with things like staffs and halberds and stuff that are weapons held in hand. So again, this can sometimes cause problems, and we'll come back to pinning in another episode. There is an alternative, and this is one that I have found preferential over the years. I've got some old sewing needles used to pin fabric in place and the like, and I use my large pliers to grab one of these needles, and then I only need a small source of ignition, a lighter or something, just to heat up the end. Don't need to be heated for long, and that's sufficient that I can now very carefully push that model onto that pin. Now that does pose me some problems. One, the pin stays hot for a little while if you overheat it, as you might have just noticed. And now I've got this bulbous end on the end here, which I can't really jab into my polystyrene or into my cork. The alternative is to again take our pliers, clip the end off, and then he will now quite nicely hold in place, and I can push them down a little bit further if I need to get a bit more grip, and that makes it a little easier to paint. For things like the arms and stuff, if I didn't want to drill, what I could do, rather than risking getting loads of blue tack on the areas near where I'm going to paint, if I take a really tiny bit of blue tack, as long as I'm careful and I'm not overly rough with my paintwork, I could take a tiny bit of blue tack, stick it on the end of the pin, push it onto the part, and then afterwards I can push it back into my blue tack painting stands, just about either rattle can prime it or airbrush it, or if I'm delicate, give it a bit of paintwork. Unfortunately the blue tack does make it a bit fiddly and it will just drop off with a bit too much force. So this one is more suitable for use on airbrush work. However, there is an alternative, and this is one of the reasons why I sometimes go to this step, because blue tack itself is not low tack. It will stick to your miniatures and leave residues on them, especially if you're spraying them, and that can be hard to remove. So what you can do is combine some of these tactics. Take a pin, clip the head off it. I'll take a different person this time. You'll see what I mean about this blue tack residue that's on the feet. That's because they were attached to the blue tack when I sprayed them, and where the blue tack meets the plastic, the solvent in the aerosol kind of partially softens the blue tack, and hence why you get that residue. So what I'm going to do now is take my pin vise, very quickly drill a little bit of a hole into the foot with my pin vise. Doesn't have to be particularly deep. And where did I put my clip pin? I can now mount that man on that pin in the same way as the paper clip. Again, I'd probably use a little bit of super glue just to pin him in place, or pin the part in place if I was being a bit rough. The advantage of heating the bottom of the foot up, or heating a pin up, and because don't heat the plastic. You heat the plastic, you'll lose any details. But if you heat the pin up and drive it into the plastic, it will stick on its own accord. As long as it's not too hot, it will bite, which is useful. But the other part of it that's useful is you can also use this on some quite delicate parts. Because that pin tip is quite fine, you can actually push that into the end of a gun barrel if you needed to, or drive it down into a cable or stem of a staff or something if you needed to. It won't take a huge amount of mechanical strength, so you do have to be careful and delicate when doing your paintwork with it. But if you wish to sub-assemble your figures, it's sometimes easier to spread the parts out onto little posts and pillars. That way you can get around all of the model and you're not worrying about blue tack residue, unless you really aren't worried about blue tack residue. Last bit of explanation, just to show you the process in action. It's a case of taking apart, got my old super glue that's almost done with, drop the head into it, put it into the part, let it hold, and then once it's set, you can stand it in a piece of foam or in a piece of cork to about paint it. The other ones that I was going to show you very quickly, something like this, it's too thin to drill through into. So again, the best strategy in this case would be getting a pin, getting some super glue on the end of it, putting it in an area that doesn't need or require any definition on. So at the back, get it placed on. You're going to end up needing to hold it or spray it with accelerant to get it a fix. But once it's fixed, I'd then go ahead and again mount it onto a piece of the foam. And for the moment, what I'll do is I'll just prop it up with a bit of blue tack to hold it in place for the time being, whilst that sets fully. Hopefully that will set well enough. Something larger like this, I would literally just take a larger piece of blue tack, just stick these limbs back down for a moment, take a larger ball of blue tack, ram it into the hole where it's never going to matter, get a pin, or if necessary even a little bit of wooden dowel, and again you could mount it like that. Again, I'll chuck this onto a cork tile, and that is how I go about sub-assembling. Things to note that I've done, all of them I've more or less pinned their feet, apart from one guy that's standing on a wooden log. The way I'm seeing it is the only bit of his foot that's in contact is the back heel, and I could probably paint him up and then flip him over and paint the wooden log separately. All the others I've pinned a foot at least so that they're able to be accessed. I've put the backpacks each on a stand. I've taken more delicate bits and used the heat treatment method to drive a pin into the narrowest point. Some of them I've drilled, some of them I've just heated. The very last thing to say about this process, especially in regards of the heating a pin up and driving it through, don't know if you can see, but on the bottom of the foot there's a tiny little bit of residual plastic. As you drive the pin in, the plastic that's molten will get pushed out, so there'll be a tiny little bit of a gap. But normally if you do it in a recess or somewhere where it doesn't matter, say inside these Krieg shoulder pads, it's not going to affect the fit of the model. With something like the foot, you may have to come back with a file afterwards and just file it flat, or take an old hobby knife and just scrape away the excess plastic. It won't be anything more significant than a mould line. Thank you for watching. I've been the Addict to the Brush, and hopefully I'll see you soon.